Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the 77th UNGA has been taking place in New York this week, and the Secretary-General has urged world leaders to tackle the big dramatic challenges of our time. Dr. Zainab Shinkafi Bagudu, the First Lady of Kebbi State and the founder and CEO of Medicaid Cancer Foundation, will be joining me from New York for further insights on the dialogue. And the EU is proposing a windfall tax on energy firms, raking in huge profits while households struggle to pay their bills. Chiara Putaturo, the EU Inequality and Tax Policy Advisor at Oxfam International, will be joining me from Brussels for more on the plans. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, let's start the show with a story that continues to make headlines here in the UK. Earlier this week, the government announced that energy bills for businesses, charities and public bodies will be capped for 6 months from October. Ministers have said the financial lifeline could halve the price paid for wholesale gas and electricity for non-domestic customers. It's hoped that the move will prevent thousands of companies from collapsing.
Because it's a much more complicated market with a whole variety of contractual arrangements. What we needed now, immediately, quickly, was something simple that would give people confidence through the winter. What we will have is a review in 3 months' time, which will allow us to see that we are giving support in the right places and that we can ensure that continued support, if that's necessary, is directed at where it needs to go. So it's essentially recognising that there is an urgent problem now that needs a big package, a broad scheme, but because people have hedges and long-term contracts, it will be possible to have fuller analysis of the market to understand where support is most needed during the 6-month period.
Well, earlier I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for more on this story. Simon, so the 10-day national mourning period has come to an end. Government business is back up and running, and it's energy bills that everybody's talking about.
Yeah, and this is what we were sort of talking about before. Obviously, the huge story of Her Majesty the Queen dominated the news, and we've come back to this because obviously this is what everyone's talking about. I think actually King Charles was almost heckled as he was doing one of his processions saying, you know, we're paying for this, but we've got this huge cost of living crisis. So the news this week is that Liz Truss has announced for businesses they're going to get the same kind of support that households are getting. Energy bills will be cut by around a half this winter for businesses in the next 6 months from October the 1st. And hospitals, schools and charities will also get this support. It basically means that you'll still have to pay for the gas and electricity that you use, but the government's energy price guarantee will limit the price that suppliers can charge for each unit of energy. So it's hoping for businesses going to cut it by around a half. That's still a lot of money because it's going up by about 4 times. So it's still going to double what people were paying before. And this was off the back of warnings from a couple of industry bodies that 25,000 businesses could go bust because of this. Now, I think actually quite a few have already because people are already paying a lot more for their energy. And I think the Labour Party are questioning, A, where this money is coming from. It's supposed to be about £150 billion combined for households and businesses. Where this money is going to come from, Sir Keir Starmer is saying that the people are going to pick up the bill for this because it's just going to be, you know, it's debt at the moment, but people are going to have to pay this back in taxes. And there's also a little bit of concern that just today, fracking, the ban on fracking has been scrapped. So in 2019, there was a ban on fracking because the UK has to hit their net CO2.
Fracking is, what is fracking?
It's kind of going under the earth, and there's a lot of controversy in terms of people don't know how safe it is and the kind of gases that could be released through it. But Liz Truss has very quickly scrapped that. Boris Johnson was very big on environmentalism and hitting net zero by 2050, and now it's going to be hard to see how we can do that if we're going to start rolling back these green initiatives. But this is on the Conservatives' agenda at the moment, which is obviously the price of living and energy bills going up due to the war in Russia. We need to be a bit more sustainable in terms of how we get our energy. So there's quite a lot of controversy about that and about how we're going to pay for this. £150 billion is a lot of money, especially after COVID and the furlough scheme. We're already in a lot of debt. So, but it's generally been welcomed, this news. Obviously, when Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak were battling it out, a lot of questions were, for Boris Johnson as well, how are we going to deal with these energy price rises? Well, now we know. The problem is, or the questions now are, how are we going to pay for this and what happens there? And Liz Truss so far has not been very detailed in terms of how we do pay back this £150 billion.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's only for 6 months, isn't it? So I think that's one of the issues.
And they're going to have to look at it again. And I think a lot of businesses are saying, well, it can't just end after 6 months. So I think it's probably going to be rolled out over sort of maybe 2-year period. But we wait and see.
We do. Thank you, Simon. To more energy news now, the EU's executive plans to raise about €140 billion by imposing windfall taxes on energy firms' abnormally high profits and redirecting proceeds to households and businesses struggling with soaring bills. Announcing long-awaited emergency measures to tackle the rising price of electricity, the EU official in charge of the green transition, Frans Timmermans, said the plans were a necessary response to energy supply shortages and high prices. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Chiara Putaturo, the EU Inequality and Tax Policy Advisor at Oxfam International. She joins me from Brussels. Chiara Putaturo, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global today. So your colleagues at Oxfam have urged EU member states to set windfall taxes of at least 50 to 90%. We know where the money's going, but why so high?
Yes, so we are calling for a tax on excess profit by at least 50 or 90%, because we are seeing that not only in the energy sectors but in several sectors, also in the pharma, in the food, in the digital sectors, companies are making really huge excess profits. So there is really room to tax a lot. And this recommendation comes after the European Commission has a stable proposal to tax the companies, the fossil fuel companies in Europe by 33%, but not all the excess profit, but just the profit that goes over the 20%. Of increase compared with the last year. So what we are asking is to increase this rate, but also considering apply a similar initiative to also other sectors where companies are doing excess profit.
Yes, Chiara, I'm sure you've been following the story in the UK too. We got a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, before Rishi Sunak campaigned to be Prime Minister. He installed a 25% tax on excess profits because energy bills are just so high here. Lots of opposition parties in the UK have asked the Conservative Party to go much further. The Prime Minister in the UK says no, because there are fears that once you go too high, these big oil titans, in our case it's BP and Shell, will just invest elsewhere. The EU Commission, as you said, they're mulling over 33%. Are there not some concerns that perhaps if you go too high, like what Oxfam is suggesting, this could lead to bigger issues? I believe Total Energies have said that this windfall tax is going to cost them €1 billion.
So the concern about investment is not so much based, because if you are going to see how they have used these profits so far, we can see that they have been not used for example, green investment, for modernizing the technologies, but actually we see an increase of payout to shareholders in terms of dividends. So there is not an actual reason for that. And then we have also to think that this tax is applied to the profit in 2022 compared with the past. Yeah. So the companies will not have so much time to shift them. But it's true that there is a major issue, but this is a global level, that companies do not report all the profits in the countries where they actually have the real economic activity. So there is this issue, but it's not a windfall tax that will solve that.
Yes, it's pretty interesting. You mentioned that, you know, it varies. There are so many nuances to this debate, and it is a debate. It's hotly raging. It has been raging in the UK. I know it's raging on the continent. Just finally, Chiara, do you think the EU Commission, is the appropriate forum for this discussion, or should it be done within each of its own member state? There are 27 of them, and we know that the economies and the needs and the issues concerning the individuals are vastly different.
So for the same reason I was mentioning before, the ideal initiative should be global. Why? Because, as I said, there is a phenomenon of profit shifting. So we can see what the excess profit is, but then to distribute these taxes, we should have a global structure. We should distribute this profit according to where the companies have the economic activity. So ideally, the initiative should be global. Regional is already a good step. Yeah. So it's better to have this European coordination. This is for sure. Before that, we were seeing some countries that had initiative, and this pushed also the European Commission to take action. But with this initiative, we will have all the member states obliged to apply something like that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the debate is still raging on. I don't think a firm decision has been made by the EU Commission just yet, but we know that high energy bills are not going away anywhere fast. And of course, it should be trickled down. Chiara Putaturo, the EU Inequality and Tax Policy Advisor at Oxfam International. A pleasure speaking with you today. To other news now, Ethereum's long-awaited merge, the transition from a proof-of-work to a proof-of-stake consensus mechanism, successfully occurred last week, and according to observers, the move is a significant accomplishment in the history of open-source software and Web3. Confused? Well, let's find out more about what this means from Simon Dixon, the CEO and founder of banktothefuture.com. He joins me now from the Isle of Man. Simon Dixon, it's always a pleasure having you on Channels Business Global because we get to feast upon your crypto Bitcoin knowledge, which is very much needed today because last week Ethereum made what's been described as an historic shift from proof of work to proof of stake. What does this mean in layman's terms, and what has been in the past 7 days the ripple effect on the entire sector?
Yeah, so it's a subject that's been meant to happen for about 7 years. So it's 7 years ago I invested in the original Ethereum. And within 7 months, they said they would shift from proof of work to proof of stake. But it's finally happened 7 years later. And essentially what it means is that Bitcoin is powered by a network of computers all around the world. And it has a fixed money supply. And it distributes those Bitcoins to those that are burning electricity in this market, which allows it to be very decentralized and distributed in a way where you need no government and you need no banks. Proof of stake is an alternative model that's been played around for a long time, but Ethereum is the second largest blockchain in the ecosystem. And proof of stake essentially means that you control the network by owning a stake. So when you own Ethereum, you actually receive new Ethereum just for holding it, and it's a new model. The challenge with proof of stake is that it's proven to be somewhat of a less decentralized model. The reason for that is because it's more complex in order to stake it, and when the average user is trying to stake those coins, they tend to just give it to someone else to do it for them. So they put it at an exchange, and those exchanges are regulated. And therefore, you end up with the majority of the stake being controlled by regulated institutions, which is similar to the central bank versus banking system.
Simon Dixon, CEO and co-founder of banktothefuture.com in the Isle of Man. Thanks so much for joining me on the show. Coming up on Channels Business Global, I'll be joined by Dr. Zainab Shinkafi Bagudu, the First Lady of Kebbi State and the founder of Medicaid Cancer Foundation, for the lowdown of activities taking place at the UN General Assembly. And I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. All this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be joined by Dr. Zainab Shinkafi Bagudu, the First Lady of Kebbi State and the founder of Medicaid Cancer Foundation. But before then, here's a breakdown of the biggest business news stories of the week. The German government has announced it will be taking a 99% stake in the country's largest gas importer, Uniper, nationalising a firm that was hard hit by Russian natural gas cuts to Europe. Uniper will also receive an €8 billion injection from the government as officials try to save a strategically important company at a time when Europe races to shift away from its reliance on Russian fossil fuel exports. Apple bosses have agreed to negotiate with its staff in Australia after the Australian Services Union brought the tech titan to the country's Fair Work Commission over employee demands for better pay and working conditions. A spokesperson for Apple said the company was committed to providing the best possible experience for its employees. The issues in Australia come at a time when the firm is under growing pressure with its retail store staff looking to unionise. Now to our final story. The 77th UNGA has been taking place in New York this week, and the Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has urged world leaders to tackle the big dramatic challenges of our time, from conflicts to the climate crisis and increasing poverty and inequality. Following an in-person pause due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this year the 193-member assembly returned to in-person speeches, with a single exception being Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari used his address to bid farewell to the UN and vowed to entrench a process of free, fair, transparent and credible elections ahead of next year's ballot. Well, for more on what's been taking place this week, I'm now being joined by Dr. Zainab Shinkafi Bagudu, the First Lady of Kebbi State and the founder and CEO of Medicaid Cancer Foundation. She joins me now from New York. Your Excellency, Dr. Zainab Shinkafi Bagudu, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. It has been a while, and I must say it's always great seeing Nigeria engaging in discourse with world leaders on the world stage. And that's what's been happening this week as hundreds have gathered in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. Can you tell us a little bit about what you have been up to?
Well, like you say, the United Nations General Assembly is a huge meeting where so many leaders and stakeholders gather. I'm a doctor and in healthcare, so I've been attending meetings that have to do with healthcare and engagements where we can benefit from coming from a country where we have issues with our healthcare system. So personally, that has been very enlightening and useful for me. On a national level, we've seen our president address the General Assembly and other stakeholders. We happen to have the Deputy Director General, Hajia Amina Mohammed, who has also been doing a lot in terms of education and generally focusing on low middle income countries and how to improve our education and access. We've also heard a lot about climate change. Mr. President mentioned this in his speech, and there tends to be a feeling that climate change is not our major issue in Africa, especially in the developing countries of around the world. But unfortunately, it is. And like he said, we contribute probably the least to the damage that is being done to the climate. However, the brunt of the disease, of the condition, is seen in a lot of low middle income countries that do not have the facilities or the infrastructure to cope with it. I have been a personal witness to that in Kebbi State. For the last 2-3 years, we've been having massive flooding that comes as a result of the climate change, and some of it is man-made damage to the environment, poor town planning, pollution from emissions, and also a lot of wastage and damage that blocks the drainages and makes it impossible for the waters once they overflood the rivers, and that floods our farmlands, causing a huge amount of damage.
Absolutely. Thank you for touching on various points there, because, of course, United Nations does have a reputation of doing a lot of chinwag and less action. But, as you said, we did hear the President addressing the Assembly and talking about the real issues, climate change being one of them. You mentioned some of the severe weather patterns that we've seen in Kebbi State, the state where you are the First Lady. What are some of the actions that you want world leaders to take place in terms of flooding to ensure that farmers are efficiently compensated for the loss of crops?
Well, before we come to compensation, we need to talk about how to stop it. And to do that, there has to be a lot more education. Yes. Education and regulation. Regulation must come from government. Buildings, poor town planning, like I said, is a major factor. And then we can come to compensation. There are lots of ecological funding that goes into all the countries, but I'm afraid to say we don't see the full effects. We have no business using ecological funding to build schools. We need schools, we need roads, we need everything. But how about the dams? For us in Kebbi, the issue comes from the dam in Sokoto, the Goronyo Dam, that is overflowing and really damaged and needs billions to repair. So things like that need to be sorted out, and then the effects will be less. States like Lagos State have done some things, but even that is not optimal. So I'd like to see a situation where we map our farmers better. There's a lot of technology that can be employed to do this satellite mapping, to know where the damage is coming from and where the problems are, and prepare them, weather reports and forecasts, and prepare them better. For instance, this year, we haven't had a lot of flooding in Kebbi. The levels of the River Niger is actually quite low. The effect of that means that come the dry season, it's going to be really dry. Yes. And so dry season farming output will be low. We must prepare the farmers as well as the country for that, and find ways in which our food security can be better balanced.
Absolutely. Food security essential there. And you've laid out a lot of policy, so hopefully the change makers are listening to you. Before I let you go, I've got to congratulate you because, of course, you are one of 3 global candidates vying to be the UICC president-elect. The UICC is an umbrella body looking after cancer initiatives across the globe. Congratulations for that. Voting opens in just a few weeks' time. Dr. Zainab, we've seen it with Amina Mohammed at the United Nations. We've seen it with Dr. Ngozi at the WTO. Hopefully we will see it with you. Why is it so important that we do see African women as leaders on the global stage?
Well, we need to see more Africans on the global stage. A lot of the issues, health, education, infrastructure, agriculture we've been talking about happens in Africa. The population of Africa is massive. So when it comes to cancer in particular, being at the table where the conversations are being had, we can share our own perspectives better. We can also prefer solutions that match the problems that we have lived in, not just being held, giving handouts as has been the past. There is a shift and it's improving, particularly since the COVID pandemic, when everybody woke up and realized that, look, we're all together. If a virus happens in one place, it can spread to the other place in seconds. So we need to sort out the health systems in a contextual and complete manner, not just in pockets and isolations of programs everywhere. They must interconnect. So it's important for us to be at that stage where these decisions are being held. And I hope, like you say, I'll be able to sit on the Cancer Union table. Cancer is a massive problem in sub-Saharan Africa because we really don't consider it a major point on the political agenda of most governments. And with people like me on that table, we can bring the awareness more, we can share our experiences and prefer the solutions. The UICC is an ideal body to do that. It's a trusted body. And hopefully, like you say, come October, I will be the president-elect.
Your Excellency, Dr. Zainab Shinkafi Bagudu, CEO, Medicaid Cancer Foundation, UICC President-elect nominee, and of course, the First Lady of Kebbi State. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Juliana.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.